Welcome everybody to the fourth webinar in our land-based learning series put on by CPAWS Southern Alberta and also Alberta Tomorrow. We are pretty thrilled today to have four guests talking about fire. As a former plant ecologist, it's probably my favorite topic to talk about when it comes to ecosystems, and also being a former high school biology teacher. I hope there are Bio 30 teachers out there because this fits perfectly with the curriculum also. So as I mentioned, this is our fourth in our series. We have four experts here to talk to you today. I'm just going to give a really quick, brief introduction to each of the four, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jacqueline. So Professor Mike Flanagan is our first speaker. He is the research chair for predictive services, emergency management, and fire science at Thompson Rivers University, and the scientific director of the Canadian Partnership for Wildland Fire Science. Dr. Flanagan has been studying fire and weather-climate interactions, including the potential impact of climate change, lightning-ignited forest fires for over 40 years. Our second speaker will be Kimberly Pearson from Waterton Lake Nature Legacy. She's an ecosystem scientist, a role that which she advances innovative work supporting healthy ecosystems, landscape scale conservation, and supporting Indigenous leadership in conservation. Her work includes management of Waterton's post-Kenow Wildfire science program, and involving more than 20 projects focused on understanding the 2017 fire's ecological effects. Our third speaker is Dylan Frank. Dylan Frank is a public outreach education officer working for Parks Canada. Previously, he was an archaeologist working on the post-Kenow Wildfire project for 3 years. So in his current role, he teaches about archaeology of the park from 10,000 years ago until today. He's a member of the Kanow Nation, Blackfoot Confederacy, whose traditional territory is where the town of Waterton is located. So working in this place is very special to him. And our fourth speaker is Alvin Strider. Alvin is a member of the Kanow Nation of Alberta and a descendant of the Blackfoot Nation in Montana. Alvin has been working for the Blood Tribe Land Management as an environmental technician for the past 5 years. Currently, he's working on promoting Indigenous land management methods that have been excluded from this environment, such as cultural burning and bison restoration. So very quickly, those are our four speakers. I'm going to pass it over to Jacqueline to get started.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. So I'd like to invite everyone to think about a nature treasure that you've recently encountered. This could be a beautiful cloud, a rock, or a plant that you noticed, an amazing encounter with an animal, or a favorite nature memory. Hold that thought of the nature treasure in your mind and in your heart. Why is that nature treasure special to you? What gift did it give you? As you're thinking about that, I would like to thank everyone for participating in land acknowledgement. And I guess that most of you did not realize that you were participating in land acknowledgement, but you absolutely were. Nature Treasures invites us not only to connect with the nature stories of our past, but the nature stories that we are creating right now, right here. Each of our nature story treasures illustrates how deeply human and universal nature connections are. Recognizing and appreciating this as land acknowledgement is pivotal to honoring the nature connections of peoples whose stories and ways of knowing lie embedded and entwined in the soil where we stand, from as far back as the land has welcomed life to this present moment. The Siksika, the Gaina, Pikani, Amskapi Pikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Arhe Nakota, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley peoples, the Ktunaxa, and the Métis. Land acknowledgement is not new, but rather it's eternal and unequivocally Indigenous. Land acknowledgement is a collective journey that is strengthened and nurtured when we each add our own nature stories and connections to its invitation. So thank you for participating in that with us. And I will get us going on Mentimeter. So we're going to be using this tool today. You can go to mentee.com on any device, can be a tablet, a phone, or a computer. Teachers can do this as a class. You can pull it up on one device and then get information from your class as we go along. And I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and then I can give some more instructions on how to use Mentee. We're going to use it throughout our time together. So I want to make sure everyone will be able to use it. So if I bring up our instructions here, you can go to mentee.com. You can either click the link that I put into the Zoom chat, or you can go to mentee.com and enter the code 14957757, and I will pop that into the code into the chat as well. And then go ahead and answer our first question. We're trying to find out who is in the room with the virtual room with us. So we'd like to see kind of what grades are around. And I'm just going to get the code. Actually, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind typing the code into the chat, if you can see it just at the top of the Mentee screen.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So awesome. We had a big start with a bunch of grade 4s, but now we have got some youth with us, some grade 12, some youth groups, post-secondary, and some adults. I know many teachers are joining in to learn with us today. So thank you for answering that first question. I'm going to give about 5 more seconds for folks to answer that first question, and then I'm going to go to another warm-up question for us.
And for our panelists, not a big surprise that we have a lot of grade 4s. The current Alberta curriculum, social studies curriculum for grade 4 focuses on Alberta. So we always seem to get a high percentage of grade 4 students.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for joining us. And our next warm-up question is to hear what you love about fire. So you can type answers in, you can survey your class if you're able to have your class there together, and put in as many things you can think about that you love about fire to kick us off today. So far we have powerful, beautiful, life giver, partnership, colors, regeneration and renewal, warmth, mesmerizing. So I can tell we're going to have an awesome session today because we've got folks that are really stoked about fire. I'll give about 30 more seconds to get some more answers here into our Mentee. And then we're going to get going on our presentations from our presenters. We've got s'mores added in, very important one. Campfires, the look of the flames, it's welcoming, it burns, it's an ecosystem process. Awesome. Thank you everyone so much for contributing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but you can keep putting in those answers, and our Mentee slides will be part of what we send as a follow-up afterwards. And don't have to close Mentee. You can just minimize it or put it to the side because we will bring it back after each speaker.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Wonderful. So I've already introduced Professor Mike Flanagan. We'll just get him to share his screen and start with our first speaker. Oh, you might be muted, Mike.
Sorry about that.
Right.
So hopefully you can see my slides, and I'm talking about fire. I'm joining you today from Kamloops, BC. It's the traditional and unceded territory of the Kamloops people. Fire, friend or foe, good or bad, these are value judgments. I'm a fire guy. I've been studying fire all my life. I'm very fortunate in that I have a career in fire, and something I love. And So that's a picture of a fire from Parks Canada. And you can actually see this is something we call a fire-generated thunderstorm. Because you can see the smoke, hopefully you can see my cursor, and then you see the white billowy clouds. And this is a very intense fire. I like this slide because fire, we live in the Earth system, the climate system, it's a complex system, it's all interconnected. And fire is part of this system and generates smoke, and which blocks the sunlight. It also affects the chemistry of the atmosphere. It deposits black carbon on glaciers, so it's part of the cryosphere. It causes the ice to melt quickly. It affects the hydrosphere, the hydrology, because it sediments, leads to debris flows, flooding. So it's just one element of a much bigger interconnected system. And that's the purpose of that slide. So let's talk about fire in Canada. I mean, it's a global thing. I mean, every year, about the size of India burns on the globe. In Canada, about 6,000 fires burn 2.8 million hectares. Now, that may not mean much to you, but it's half the size of Nova Scotia. Okay, these are often high intensity, big flames, and high severity, impacts the trees and the grass. And Alberta, we average about 1,300 fires that burn 300,000 hectares. I forgot to put the HA there then. And what does that mean? It's about 4 times the size of the city of Calgary or the city area of Edmonton. It's a very large chunk of territory. Lightning fires, they're about 50% of the fires started in Alberta and Canada, but they burn most of the area burned. And there's a number of reasons for that. They occur in clusters, often in remote areas, and hard to extinguish or not extinguished, allowed to burn. Fires have 2 different causes, lightning and people. Spring is dominated by people, and summer, our lightning season, lightning dominates. Now, a really important thing about fires, it's really about the extremes. Okay, in Canada, 3% of the fires are over 200 hectares. A hectare is about the size of a soccer pitch or football field. But they're responsible for 97% of the area burned. And much of this happens on just a few days of hot, dry, windy weather. So, and fire is just not an Alberta issue. It goes from sea to sea to sea. And you can see we have lots of fire in Canada. So some fire facts, okay? There are different types of fires. Some are what we call smoldering or ground fires, and that's the picture in the top left corner. And they just, no flames, they just burn, and they can burn for weeks and months and years. So often in what we call peat, which is organic material 40 centimeters or more in depth. Surface fires is where you see flames on the surface. And if you see the schematic on the bottom there, when the fire is on the forest floor here, that's a surface fire. A crown fire is when the fire spreads from the forest floor up to the tops of the tree. We call those the crowns of the trees. Thus, crown fires. These are high intensity fires, and we see these a fair bit in our forests of Canada. So they're very hard to extinguish when they get to this rank 5 and 6 category. And what a lot of people don't realize that when a fire does, unfortunately, in our community, it's not because the fire front reaches the community, it's because in front of the fire, the wind carries these little burning pieces of bark or twig or needles, and they land on something flammable in your neighborhood and start a house on fire, and then one house burns to the next house. And that's how a fire typically enters a community. Fires are natural, okay? It's Mother Nature at work. And our forests, they survive and thrive in this regime of fairly regular, high intensity, big flame crown fires. And, you know, what happens is it removes the competition because it kills everything above ground. It removes the organic material on the forest floor, And so you can see the mineral soil, and that's where the new seeds like to grow in the mineral soil, and it allows the sunlight to penetrate for the new growth. Now they have various strategies to survive this, these fires. Some have serotinous cones. That means the cones are sealed with a waxy resin, and the heat from the fire opens those cones for the next generation. Some sprout like aspen. After a fire, you see a whole bunch of suckers coming up. There's a caveat here in that our climate is changing. So much warming is going on that this may be impacting this natural regeneration process. And Kim's going to be talking to us example about Kino, and we'll be presenting some of those examples that maybe regeneration or recovery isn't going so well in some places because of climate change. Now, there's a few take-home messages in this short presentation, but this is one of them. The recipe for the wildfire is the same in Alberta as it is in Siberia or the Amazon. You need 3 ingredients: vegetation, fire people call it fuel, the stuff burns. What type of fuel? Is it grass? Is it shrubs? Is it trees? How much do you have? How dry it is, it's really important. So that's the fuel. You need something to burn, you need something to start the fire. We've already talked about people and lightning. And third, conducive weather, hot, dry, windy. Those extreme conditions really drive things. And that bottom right picture, this is a fire in November from near Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. And it's one of those ground fires that can burn through the winter. And I believe this one actually did burn right through the winter. So I'm going to wrap up. Fires are part of our natural system. Is it good? Is it bad? This is a value judgment, and we cannot, and our fire management history has been to try, our Western culture fire management history has been to remove fire from the landscape, and that is ill-fated. We should not remove it. We cannot remove it. We tried, we couldn't do it, but nor should we. Friend or foe, good or bad? An answer to many scientific questions is it depends on your context, on your perspective. Fires can be beneficial, fires can be detrimental. For example, if you were in Fort McMurray, May 3rd, 2016, fire was not your friend, okay? But if you're a bug-infested forest like mountain pine beetle, fire is an cleansing agent and resets the clock. It's healthy. If you're a mushroom, or a morale, or if you're a blueberry, fire is good because it sets the stage for you. So there's many reasons why fire is beneficial, many reasons why it's detrimental. I just wanted to show a podcast, put a plug in for a friend of mine, and her podcast called Good Fire. So it talks about all the benefits of fire, but as I just mentioned, there are some times when fire is not our friend. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And I'll show a picture of smoke. Okay, and this is from a satellite that sits above the Earth and rotates at the same speed of the Earth and takes pictures every 5 to 10 minutes. And this gray stuff, that's smoke and travels thousands of kilometers and even around the globe. So thank you for your attention, and I will stop sharing at this time.
Thank you. Wow. Thanks for putting it into perspective how much land in Alberta actually burns per year, because I think that helps a lot of people. And I know hectares, especially for some middle school, elementary students, is a really, well, for most people, hectares is a unit that is hard to visualize. Jacqueline, do you want to put up the mentee slide, please?
Yes.
I also, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just mention to folks that the next mentee slide, I'm going to share these at the end, but I'm not going to share my screen just to facilitate getting through to each speaker. But our next question on mentee is, how did Mike inspire you? So take some survey from the class, or if it's yourself on there, and just type in your answers while Jennifer leads a Q&A.
I was going to say, Mike, that I love your your statement that fire is natural, but it can be not good in some cases. Not sure where our students are joining us from today, but you're right. If they happen to be around Fort McMurray a few years ago, they may not have such a favorable opinion of fire. I know I live just outside of Calgary, and for the past at least 3 summers, we have had ash falling and have to keep our windows closed in the summer because the air quality is so poor from those fires. So yes, it's good for the ecosystem. Can we summarize? It's good for the ecosystem, but it's not always good for people.
It's good for many ecosystems. In some places, fire is not natural, and the Amazon rainforest is an example of that. In Canada, fire is a natural element of our ecosystems.
Yeah. Jacqueline, did we have any questions that showed up in the question and answer?
We have not had any yet, so I do encourage folks, if you have questions, you can either use the chat or the Q&A feature, and there'll be time after each presenter to be able to answer those, but there'll also be time at the end. So if you have more questions for Mike, we can make sure we get to those after all the speakers as well.
Yeah, great. While we're kind of transitioning here, Kimberly, did you want to share your screen, please? Kimberly will be our next speaker, focusing more on the fire that took place in Waterton a few years ago. Might not have garnered as much media as, say, the Fort McMurray fire did, but nonetheless, it was a major event and interesting. I haven't yet got down to Waterton to see the post-fire ecosystem.
Jennifer, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it's great.
We're good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure joining you on this exciting webinar alongside my friends, Dr. Flanagan and Dylan and Alvin. And in Dr. Flanagan's awesome introduction to wildfire science, he provided some guidance on that question of whether fire is a friend or foe. So keep that in mind as I share this example story of the Kenow Wildfire that took place in Waterton Lakes National Park in 2017. I'm just going to make, there we go. Just want to make sure you can see my next slide there, hey? Okay, the park is shown here in bright yellow. It's a 2.5-hour drive south from Calgary in the far southwestern corner of Alberta. It's a special place within Treaty 7 territory where the mountains and the prairies meet. And some of you will have visited this park, I'm sure, with your families. I can't see you, but please put up your hands to show your classmates if you've visited Waterton at some point. And the Keno Wildfire was started by a lightning strike, and you should, I'm just going to see if there's a star that showed up there. Where that star is about 12 kilometers west of the Alberta boundary with British Columbia. The Keno Wildfire started with a lightning strike on Keno Mountain. And then there's a lot more that happened after that. So here's a photo, one of the first photos taken on the fire on Keno Mountain soon after it started. And it was already too big at that point for firefighters to control because the conditions were very, very dry and hot, and the fire was burning in coniferous forest. So for the next 12 days, the fire grew gradually in British Columbia. And using wildfire science, we knew that the fire would eventually move into Alberta and Waterton Lakes National Park. And we were fortunate to have the time to prepare as best we could. For example, we evacuated the entire national park, and this was the first time that's ever happened in a national park in Canada. And we prepared as best we could for the fire to enter and move through the park. So here are some photographs of firefighters protecting buildings before the fire arrived. And this was one of the first photos taken, this photo was taken as the fire was getting very close to Alberta. As expected, the fire moved through the park very quickly on the night of September 11th, and it burned 39% of the national park's area. So this is the head of the fire. It was a large crown fire, and the fire was very intense. And the helicopter where this photo was taken from was about half a kilometer away, and the crew inside could feel the fire's heat through the plastic window of the helicopter. So because it was so extreme, this fire was impossible to put out, but we ensured that all of the people in the area moved to safe spaces. And this map shows the Green National Park boundary, and the fire began in BC. There's an animation here showing where the fire started. It's showing where the fire moved over the course of several days, just slowly growing in British Columbia. The green areas outlining Waterton Lakes National Park, and slowly it's moving toward the boundary, and then overnight on September 11th, moved through the national park very, very rapidly. And there's an image of it when it was all said and done. The following day, the weather shifted and the fire stopped moving on its own. And this map also shows the fire's severity, which is how much the fire affected the plants and the soils. Red on the scale is the highest possible severity, and dark green is the lowest. So from this, you can see that most of this area is red. So it's the highest severity possible, really. And in almost all of that area where the fire burned, it removed all the live plants and burned away even some of the soil. So very, very extreme effects. And more on that just shortly after we take a quick look at how well the firefighters' efforts worked in protecting the Waterton town site. And also, sorry, the Waterton town site is right here, if you can see my cursor. It's a small village in the national park. And then also the Prince of Wales Hotel, which was about 90 years old at this time. They were both protected by water and just other fire preparation efforts. And you can really see the difference that that made when you look at the surrounding area that was burned. And here's a closer look at how those red areas on the map looked right on the ground right after the fire. All of the plants above the ground had been removed by the fire. And again, the soils were affected as well. And very big ecological changes have taken place on the land very suddenly and literally overnight. And so all of the living things in the habitats where they live have been affected by the fire. And when we look at these very big changes, we may feel a little bit worried about the land having a hard time healing and being healthy again. I don't blame anyone for feeling that way when they look at that, but there's great hope. Nature has superpowers and knows what to do even when something so significant has happened and everything looks black. So this photo on the left shows a grassland area just weeks after the fire, and it looks like a black blanket had been laid over the land. But on the right, when spring came, so did a blanket of green, and many plants grew back from the roots or seeds that were safe underground. So we can call this process ecological renewal. The land is healing. It can take some time, and it will probably look different than we've been used to, but it's continuous and it's very powerful. And this blended photo shows how renewal looked in an area that was a coniferous forest prior to the fire. On the left, right after the fire in 2017, there were no signs of green plants at all. But in the middle, after one summer of growing, there had already been a lot of shrubs coming back in 2018. And on the right, after 2 growing seasons and 2 summers, even more shrubs are growing in the rocky soil. And since the fire, many animals, such as black bears, have continued living in areas that burned. And profusions of wildflowers have been coloring the land beautifully since the fire. These glacier lilies were the first plants to grow in this forest in the spring after the fire. As Dr. Flanagan showed us, fires are natural and they're an important force that shapes landscapes like the one here at Waterton. And this is another blended photo looking toward what's known as the Bear's Hump, where there's a popular hiking trail. This is the Bear's Hump area here. So fires had not happened long before. These photos were taken in 1874. Whoopsie. You can see signs of burnt trees here on this hillside. And then again in 2017, there's the impact of the wildfire, the Kenow fire is visible. So in all the time before the first photographs were taken, fire has been here shaping the land and healthy communities of plants and animals and people. And Alvin will speak more to that soon. In national parks, we typically allow nature to take the lead in responding to disturbances like fires, avalanches, and floods. Rather than interfering with natural processes, we observe them and learn from them. And the Kenow Wildfire has given us an amazing learning opportunity to learn how nature is responding to a fire that brought very big ecological changes. And this is very helpful to Parks Canada and its partners in caring for this special place. And we hope it will also be helpful to others working around the world where similar fires are happening. We're doing this through an awesome fire science program, which is the largest of its kind ever in Canada. And over the 5 years since the fire, 22 research projects have been examining many aspects of the ecosystem. And here are some scientists who have been studying things like amphibians, bats, landscape photography, water, and plants. To review, key things that we at Waterton Lakes National Park have learned from the large, intense, and very fast-moving Kino wildfire are that the fire caused very big ecological changes. Ecological renewal, or the process of the land healing, began as soon as the ground began cooling from the fire. And finally, this is an amazing opportunity for us to observe and learn how nature renews itself and natural renewal unfolds. And we are taking that opportunity along with many scientist partners. So this is a big story to squeeze into the short time that I've had to share today. And if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to check out these resources, and I'll share them in the chat soon. And I welcome you also to visit Waterton Lakes National Park to explore the effects of the wildfire yourself. There's just so much to observe and to learn. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and then my colleague Dylan will go into depth on the Kino Fire learning project that he has been part of. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. I'm going this summer for sure now. I want to see this succession in action. That animation that you showed of how quickly the fire moves is remarkable. In that one day, it basically enveloped the entire park. It's crazy. Jacqueline, I think, has a mentee slide or question that she's put up.
Yes, please. If everyone can return back to mentee. If you've closed it out, no problem. You can re-click on the link or go back to mentee.com and put in that code 14957757 to take you to our mentee presentation for today, and you can navigate to the slide of how did Kimberly inspire you, and let us know what you learned from Kimberly today. And while we're doing that, please also let us know in the Q&A or the chat if you have any questions for Kimberly.
Yes. So I mentioned before, I live around Calgary, so I've had plenty of opportunity to go through Yoho National Park, through Kootenay National Park, and see some older fire effects in those. I don't know if everybody around the province is lucky enough to be able to visit areas that have burned in the past to see just what they look like now. While we are getting our mentee answers, Dylan, would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, of course.
And I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. You can see the slides now? Okay. Oki, misto nadanako, akawa misatu mistakis. Hello, my name is Dylan Frank, and I'm an archaeologist and a public outreach officer with Parks Canada in Waterton Lakes National Park. Thanks for joining me today to talk about the exciting artifacts and archaeological sites that have been found here in Waterton over the last 5 years. So because of the Kenow fire that Kim just discussed, erosion has greatly increased, which means archaeological sites throughout Waterton Lakes National Park have been damaged and in some cases completely destroyed. Artifacts were also greatly affected. Rocks were shattered by the heat, bone was melted and warped, and features such as old roads were exposed. All of these things are very important for archaeologists because they tell the story of what happened in this place. These photos show an old metal framed wagon, a bison jawbone, the old visitor center building, an exposed road, and a rock that burst into a few pieces from the fire itself. So the archaeology program here in Waterton is very unique in a lot of ways. One thing that makes it unique is the amount of visibility that we had when we first went out onto the land after the fire. Normally, plants cover up the entire forest floor, making our jobs much more difficult because they actually hide the artifacts. Imagine losing a sock in your messy room and not being able to find it. When you clean the room up, the sock is much easier to find. And that's pretty much how it was for us after the fire with artifacts. In 2018, we were in a race to beat the plant regrowth. During this time, only site surveys were done with very little digging. In 2019, the focus was the opposite. Lots of digging was done to try to understand the sites and landforms a little bit more. And a little bit of surveying was done when there was time or if there was a rainy day. 2022 was full of report writing since we weren't allowed in the field due to the pandemic. And in 2021, we did a mix of both digging and more surveying. Most recently in 2022, we focused more on training park staff, sharing the work we've done to the public through different forms of outreach, and also engaging local Indigenous communities to see how they want us to tell the archaeological stories that we've been discovering. So this is the part that a lot of people think of when they hear the word archaeology, the artifacts. In Waterton, artifacts from 3 general time periods have been found. These time periods are called the pre-contact, which is before Europeans, proto-contact, so before European people made it to the area, but when their trade goods arrived, and post-contact, so after European people started living in the area. Overall, during the 4 field seasons since the Kenow Wildfire, the team has identified 80 new sites, found more than 85 bison skulls, identified 23 different rock material types, visited 350 archaeological sites, found 94 projectile points, and we've collected over 20,000 artifacts. And this was all possible due to the ground being completely cleared from all the plants that normally cover and protect the artifacts. Examples of pre-contact artifacts are items like arrowheads and stone tools, like you can see there in the left picture. Proto-contact artifacts are items like metal arrowheads and sometimes tiny little glass beads that were used for trade. And post-contact artifacts are usually glass and metal items, like bottles and old machinery pieces. And in some cases, even sardine cans, like you can see in that right photo. Here's a few more photos that show some more examples of different artifacts that we found here in Waterton. The first photo is what we call a maul or a hammerstone. The second photo is a metal arrowhead used for trading between Indigenous people and Europeans. And the last photo is something that many of you may recognize, a bottle of 7-Up. Anything that was made before the year 1950 is actually classified as an artifact, and people have been on the landscapes of Waterton for thousands and thousands of years, which means that there's quite a lot of artifacts out there. So that was pretty quick. I wish I had more time because I have tons and tons of photos that I love to talk about and share. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in to learn more about the amazing archaeology that's been done here in Waterton Lakes National Park. If you're interested in learning more, look up Artifacts in the Ashes on YouTube or Google, or visit our Parks Canada website to find out more information. Now I guess I'll pass it over to Jennifer and Jacqueline for questions if there's any.
Thanks, Dylan. I have a question for you. What is one thing that you learned after finding all of these artifacts? Like perhaps was there one area of the park that was actually used more than you thought in the past? Or like, was there any surprise when you encountered all of these artifacts?
I'd say the entire park was actually used by people for pretty much ever. And that was pretty eye-opening for me to see how the entire landscape was used. But one thing that really stuck out to me was the amount of rock material types that I actually mentioned, 23. So in Waterton, there's actually only 3 of those rock material types that are sourced to here. So that means that the other 20 have come from somewhere else. So places like Yellowstone, North Dakota, British Columbia, all over the Great Plains is where different rock materials came from. And to actually get here, people would either go to those places or they would trade with others. And so it just showed how much of a meeting place this Waterton was for people to come and exchange ideas and materials and just encounter others as they're on their travels.
Amazing. Wow. Jacqueline, do we have another mentee question for our viewers?
We do, so please return to mentee.com, and the link is there in the chat for you, and let us know how Dylan inspired you. So I think you're sensing the theme, same question each time. We want to hear what you learned from each presenter.
So I'm assuming that this work is going to keep going on in the park, Dylan?
That's a tough one to answer.
Oh,
We were pretty dependent on once-in-a-lifetime funding for this type of project. And it was 5 years, and we actually just came to the end of the 5-year project. And so that's what my current role is for, is to educate people on everything that we've found, and maybe that'll spark interest and perhaps more funding to be granted to us to continue our research. So we can cross our fingers and hope that more comes about. But for now, we have what we have.
yeah. What an opportunity, though, because things are going to start getting covered up once again with the new growth, and yeah, fascinating.
Time is ticking.
Yeah, great. Well, Alvin, did you want to share your screen, and we'll move on to our last speaker. And I'll pass it over to you, Alvin.
You could see my screen. Awesome. Okay. Nastuanago Natayunasaksan. Hello. My name is Alvin Strider. It's a good day. So yeah, I'm just here to speak to you just kind of about the relationships with the elements that Natitapi or Siksakatitapi people had pre-contact or pre-treaty, pre-reservation, before we were colonized. So yeah, together our relationships with the elements are based on the medicine wheel or Akugatsun circle, and that encompasses the 4 directions, and each 4 directions has different significant meaning with the kind of 4 significant elements: air, fire, water, and land. And then those connections with each terrestrial species or water beings, the element fire, and how we respected each and utilized each to live on this landscape. That is an overlay of Blackfoot territory, which encompasses, it goes into BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and that is where the Blackfoot people lived prior to being driven onto reservations due to colonization and assimilation policies. So yeah, just we had a relationship with fire. We utilized it to help renew the landscape as we moved along the landscape through our seasonal rounds. There's a picture from the Glenbow Museum with a couple of my ancestors, the Blackfoot people, lighting a fire to help rejuvenate that area. That would help attract our main source of food and main source of, well, everything, the bison. And that would help kind of navigate our seasonal round for the up and coming years. Everything was planned. We didn't just nomadically go throughout the landscape. We had presence on the landscape. Although some people think a lot of the land was a wilderness, human presence, like Dylan's presentation about the artifacts that were found, human presence is all over North America and the continent. So, and there's just an example of how we would carry fire throughout the landscape, because you didn't want to have to restart fire because we didn't have matches or lighters back in those days. So to carry those, we would use those horns filled with different ignition sources that would kind of keep the coal burning as we moved from camp to camp. And there was people that were in charge, fire carriers, and they would be in charge of doing that. And if that went out, they didn't do their job properly, and that would it would take some time to get a fire going, especially on the prairie landscape where my people roamed. There wasn't that many ignition sources, and you would have to travel far to get flint or other wood implements so you could create that ignition source. So today we are trying to rejuvenate that relationship with fire. Due to fire suppression, our ecosystems are out of whack. That's why we're getting these catastrophic fires like the Kenow fire that are just stand replacing everything. Fire was used as a tool for ecosystem management, and all of our ecosystems or most of them are fire adapted, and they need that fire interval to help keep up the ecosystem health. So today we've reintroduced or rematriated that relationship with fire as a tool to help control invasive species, invasive grasses that have been influenced by agricultural practices, and then to help the production of our traditional plants. There's been studies done that look at the production of berries or roots and how nutritious they come back after the first 3 or 4 years after a fire, and the abundance that they are. So that's kind of our mission today, is to how we can create that educational awareness piece of how fire could be used as a tool and how fire can be used to help mitigate that risk of wildfires on the landscape. So that's it's met with both good and bad feelings, and we're trying to navigate those through cooperative planning. And Waterton Lakes has been instrumental in helping us navigate those red tape to help practice that good neighbor policy. And that's just an example of our burn. And then after our burn, in just off the Waterton boundary there on our reserve. And then this is the spring, a few weeks after we burnt, just to show you the rejuvenation factor of what we're trying to encompass in this landscape. We're going to burn more area and look at burning down on our main reserve. This is our timber limits up in the mountains, and we're going to be hopefully restore that historical interval of 5 to 10 year burns within our tribal boundaries. Yeah, thanks. I think I went too fast, but yeah.
Thanks. I'm glad you brought up the example of using fire now for our purposes, because we know that it will rejuvenate the ecosystem. And interesting about the nutrition of berries. I didn't know that. So specifically, what berries would you be talking about on your lands then?
All Saskatoons, choke cherries, and then the roots. So we have a particular root we call moss, which is the prairie turnip, which is becoming harder to find just because of the fire suppression has caused species heterogeneity. So we need more biodiversity, and fire helps that, and it opens up growing space. And a lot of our traditional plants are sitting dormant underneath these mats of grass that have just continuously grown, right? So as we ignite those seed banks come up, and we're able to go out and harvest those and have more space. Due to colonization, we don't have that much area to harvest. We only have our reserve boundaries where we can comfortably harvest from. So having these little pockets or little islands where we can harvest and burn, like even native prairie, it's endangered, right? So we're just trying to manage and help control and help that ecosystem help come back, this utilizing fire and bison grazing. So that's just,
Yeah, fascinating. I love how, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the two-eyed seeing model. So the blending of kind of Western science and Indigenous ways of knowing, and you just brought up multiple other examples, like you were talking about invasive species and how it affects biodiversity, and these are all such important concepts that we talk about in ecology. And your people have always known this and been practicing or using fire to increase the biodiversity. So fascinating. Jacqueline, do we have a mentee question? I just noticed my computer is about to die, so I have to find my card.
Yes, we do have 2 last mentee questions. So if you can let us know how Alvin inspired you in his presentation, that is the next question. And when you've wrapped up with that, there is one more question that is asking you to share a key learning or inspiration from our whole hour together today in 1 word. And you can submit as a class more 1 word multiple times. So if you have lots of ideas coming in from the class, please submit kind of your 1 word summary of how you were inspired or what you learned today.
Great. Another thing I wanted to touch on was the whole concept of controlled burns or prescribed burns, whatever you want to call it, I guess. I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk a bit about this, but it's not just, oh, let's just start some fire over here and see what happens. There's a little bit more to it than that, isn't there?
Yes, a lot more. And Kim may have some. Parks Canada does a lot of prescribed burning. It's a very useful tool, and Indigenous peoples around the world have been using fire for millennia. And there's publications showing 80 different uses of fire for browse, so they can get game back in there, for berries, for getting rid of invasive species. There's numerous reasons why we use fire. So getting fire back on the landscape, lots of planning, because you don't want to burn when it's too windy, because it may escape. You can't burn when it's too wet, so you got to have just the right weather conditions, just the right fuel conditions. You have to be there with lots of people to make sure it stays within the boundaries. We used to do a lot more when I first started, and it's actually gotten less and less. And we need to go the other way. The problem is smoke. People don't like smoke, but you want to burn on a day when there's good, what we call ventilation. So takes the smoke up in there and keeps it away from the ground. But we should be doing a lot more. And we have a lot still to learn from our Indigenous peoples who've been practicing it until we make them stop, unfortunately.
Yeah, quite often when I drive to the mountains, there are signs saying, please do not report smoke. It is, we know there's smoke is there. It's for a prescribed burn or a controlled burn, but definitely people panic if they don't know what's going on. Kim, did you want to address any controlled burning that Parks Canada is involved with?
Sure. Just to add, I think Mike did a great job of answering that question, that a lot of planning goes into prescribed fires, and Parks Canada has been doing a lot of prescribed fires for several decades now. We have a lot more to learn and a lot more of them to do. And I guess I was just thinking back to a prescribed fire planning course that I took part in along with Alvin and some others in Parks Canada a couple of springs ago now, I think. And that really gave us a good idea for those of us who aren't necessarily planning the fires, but just how much thought and planning goes into it, and really making the decision on whether and when it's appropriate to light them. So it can be challenging in places like the Waterton area, where wind is a really big factor. It's windy here most days of the year, at least a little bit, sometimes a real lot, like over 100 kilometers an hour winds often. So those are not good days for burning, obviously. But days like Alvin was talking about this last May, where he led a cultural burn and cultural fire in the Blood Timber Reserve, that was a phenomenal, perfect day for it. And I look forward to seeing Alvin lead the way on more fires like that on Blood Tribe lands and beyond, and even within Waterton Lakes National Park.
And I know Alvin was talking about, I think, Alvin, you were talking more about burning native grasses and burning invasives to rejuvenate the native grasses. I know there in the past, 10, 15, almost 20 years now, there's been a lot of talk about burning forested areas to control mountain pine beetle. Does anyone have any expertise on the mountain pine beetle?
Mike, I nominate you for that one. You're likely the best.
Yeah, I'm not a bug person, I'm a fire person. Fire is a very good agent for controlling, but we have this problem with this bug because of climate change. Cold temperatures in winter used to kill it, but our winters are getting warmer. And also because of our forest management, we have large areas of lodgepole pine, which is one of the favorite foods for this bug. It also likes jack pine as well, which we have in Alberta. We have both jack and lodgepole pine. So it's been spreading, and yeah, fire is one way, but it's forest management or land management is also another way to help control the spread of this, as well as addressing human-caused climate change is something we have to attend to.
Yeah, so it's almost like we're getting a perfect storm. We're getting more fires because of climate change. Climate change is also affecting other parts of the ecosystem, like insect infestations, and I guess it just proves how everything in the ecosystem is related and connected. And when we're thinking about the management and land management, we have to think about that big picture. Yeah. Jacqueline, do we have any good responses from our mentee questions or extra questions for our panelists?
Yeah, I think I have one question that also comes up a lot in CPAWS programming when I'm talking about climate change and talking about forest fires and stuff. And Alvin kind of alluded to this a little bit, I think, and maybe you can speak to it and other folks can jump on. And I'm just trying to frame the question. It's more of a topic, but that kind of idea that with climate change, we are having more wildfires and more intense wildfires. And I know that another part of that is because of stopping burning in our ecosystem for so many years as well and getting the older forests. So students often ask kind of about this, how do we address this fact that we're having more wildfires, but also our ecosystems need the fire? And how can we kind of make that balance of not too much fire and not too little fire? I'm not sure, Alvin, did that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so that just reintroducing fire to the landscape and slowly burning areas so that you can increase more areas, but it's like a soundproofing system, right? Like you're burning to eliminate that risk that fire suppression has caused. Like our forests are overgrown. Like I said, they're out of whack. Mountain pine beetle, because these forests haven't burnt for so long, like the lodgepole pine, they have that 100-year cycle of burning, and we just need to reintroduce that. And I guess at small levels, because of human populations occupying these mountainous ecosystems. And then once we do that, we'll be able to help at least not eliminate it, but at least help try to control that risk of catastrophic fires, this stand replacing our mountain ecosystems. But yeah, it's gonna happen, and we have to be proactive and utilize fire as a tool, respect it, and make sure that we're planning properly and not just lighting fire for the fun of it, right? Like there's always plans that go in and all that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning the planning part, Alvin. That's what Alberta Tomorrow is all about, is having students make land use plans for the future. And right now we can't add fire as a disturbance on the simulator, but that'd be pretty cool if you could do that and see how it changes the ecosystems. And it's not going to happen overnight, is it? It's going to take some time to get that balance back in the ecosystem.
And Jennifer, I'll just add that yeah, that's just like Alvin was just talking about in Jacqueline's question. It's complex situation. It's tricky now. We've got ourselves into an interesting situation where it's you know, a little bit trickier to have some prescribed fires to help reduce that risk of more catastrophic wildfires like Alvin was referring to. And Alvin hit it right on the head about taking it slow and gradually. But really what we really need is youth and young people who are interested in taking on careers in fire management and various aspects of fire. And I'm sure there are a lot of people, a lot of youth on this call right now who are great candidates for that. We could use your help into the future. Just something to think about if you're thinking about careers and what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, that's great, because I think there are a lot of those careers that you don't think of initially, but hopefully webinars like this and having amazing speakers like you guys can help motivate some students to go into those fields. Great. Jacqueline, do we have any last questions that have popped up?
No, I think we've addressed everything. Is there any last words that our presenters and panelists want to make?
I'll just say we need fire. We need the right fire, the right time, at the right place. And we should be using prescribed fire as well as wildfires to achieve those objectives. And yeah, this is a world of fire.
Thank you. Any other last comments? I know that I'm sure I could have given all of you guys a full hour to speak just on your individual topics. So I really appreciate you being able to break it down into these kind of 10-minute chunks for our students. Lots to think about, lots of connections to the Alberta curriculum for sure. So thank you so much for joining us here today. Jacqueline, do you have the slides with the links from CPAWS and Alberta Tomorrow?
I do not. Sorry, Jennifer.
Oh, no problem. Maybe we'll just type it into the chat. I just wanted to let everybody know that CPAWS has a multitude of excellent education programs for all age groups here in Alberta, mostly Southern Alberta, I suppose. And also Alberta Tomorrow is a totally free online land use simulator. We have 360 video tours of Alberta's natural regions. Students are able to time travel back to the year 1910, see what the landscape was like then, time travel forward to the year 2050 and see what the landscape might be like. Also, students are able to make their own plans for the future that tries to balance our environmental needs and social economic needs. And that's all available at www.albertatomorrow.ca. We also have a climate change module that allows you to look at the difference between a mild, medium, and hot climate change scenario. And I encourage you to look at Northern Alberta just as a large landscape and run the different scenarios and see what's going to happen to wetlands and what's going to happen to the area of forest and what happens to the area of natural grasslands with those different climate change scenarios. We also just added an Indigenous voices section. So we have Indigenous map overlays that show traditional territories. You know, Alvin showed the traditional territory of the Blackfoot people, which is very large. And you can compare that to the size of the reserves that we have today. So traditional territories, languages, treaty areas, all those map overlays are also on Alberta Tomorrow for you to investigate. So if we have no last minute comments, thank you once again to all of our presenters and thank you to all the students. And and other people who joined our webinar today. If you want to check out our other 3 webinars, so we did do Earth, talking about the land, Air, talking about climate change, Water, talking about fish and water quality, and we ended off with Fire today. All 4 of those webinars have been recorded and are available for you to use in your classroom. They can be found on the Alberta Tomorrow YouTube channel, and I'm guessing on the CPAWS YouTube channel also. So find them wherever you can, and we encourage you to use them in your classroom and contact us if you have any questions. Great. Well, with that, sorry, Declan?
Just saying thank you to everyone for joining us.
So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.